Uh, Last week or a couple weeks ago, we started talking about walking by faith, and we talked about faith by Abraham and Sarah. And so this week, we will learn about three more patriarchs. And I'm sure if you were here a couple weeks ago, you know who these three individuals are. And so before we go into our study today, oh, there it is. Awesome. Yay, I'm happy now. Okay. So before we go into our study today, I want us to do a quick recap of our study from a couple weeks ago. I'm going to get technical difficulty. So yeah, this week I'll be presenting on faith by Jacob, Isaac, and Joseph, and then next week I'll present again on Moses. All right, so let's get right into it. So last class, we talked about Abram, and we talked about his faith, and also we spent a lot of time talking about Abraham, but we didn't spend a lot of time on Sarah. And so in that class, we learned that Abraham was asked by God to take his son, whom he loved, into the land of Moriah, where he was to sacrifice Isaac. And once again, Abraham doesn't hesitate. He does exactly as God had told him to do so. And so we also learn that in that moment, we see faith by Isaac too, because he allows Abraham to take him into this land to be sacrificed by God. In fact, in Hebrews 11, verse 17, it says that by faith, when Abram was tested, offered up Isaac. What that tells us is when God asked Abraham to go into the land of Moriah to offer up Isaac, he had already made up his mind. And to us, that is a tremendous show of faith, right? Because this epistle was written to Christians whom were being persecuted. And so for them, it was an example of faith. And so with that being said, would you please turn with me to the book of Hebrews? And today we'll be reading from 11, chapter 20 to 22. So Hebrews. So Hebrews 11, verse 20 to 22 says, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. So we will end right there. So this week we only have 3 verses to work with. And so for us to go forward and to understand what is going on, I want us to take a quick pivot, and that is, at this point, we know that Sarah had passed away, and she lived to be about 127, and so during this time, Abraham asked I believe the head of his household in Eliezer to go out into the land of Haran and find a wife for Isaac. And he actually makes him vow not to find him a wife from the land of Canaan. So he agrees to the vow and goes out into this land and finds a wife whom we know to be Rebekah. And so when he meets Rebekah, Rebekah agrees to come back into the land of Canaan. And she meets Isaac. And we know that Isaac, is love at first sight. So Isaac sees her and he falls in love and they get married. But wait a minute. Once again, the thing that haunted Abraham and Sarah comes back to haunt Isaac and Rebekah, because we find out that Rebekah is barren. She cannot have kids. And as we all know, the promise that was made to Abraham was to be fulfilled through Isaac, right? And so Isaac, in show of his faith, prays to God fervently. And in this account, what happens? God sees the faith of Isaac. When he prays, he knows that God is going to listen to him because he had faith in the promise that was handed to his father in Abraham. And so God opens the womb of Rebekah, and she has two twins. And what are the names of the twins? Jacob and Esau. So the twins, the birth of these twins and the things that happens between, the events that unfolds between these twins, I believe is the basics of our study today. The things that happens between these two twins that are birthed to Rebekah is the focus of our study today. And so with that being said, allow me to make one pivot, and that is that throughout this time, when these events are happening, Isaac also showed tremendous amount of faith, because we learn that I believe in chapter 27, Isaac. Well, before I go there, let me also make this remark that throughout this class, I want you to keep two things in the back of your mind, and these are themes that we've been encountering throughout this class and this series. Is that I want you to keep in mind the example of faith by each patriarch, and also the promises of God by each patriarch. And so, with that being said, would you please turn with me to Genesis chapter 26? And can I have someone read Genesis 26, verse 1 through 12, please?
Famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac dwelt in Gerar. And the men of the place asked about his wife, and he said, "She is my sister." For he was afraid to say, "She is my wife," because he thought, lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. Now it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah his wife. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Quite obviously she is your wife, so how could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I said, lest I die on account of her." And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might soon have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death."
So you might be wondering why I wanted us to take a look at this particular account. And that is, here we see a promise that is made to Isaac. Because when God tells Isaac to go into, to stay in this land, he actually does obey. Now, wait a minute. When Abraham was, in this particular instance, was asked by God to go into Egypt when there was a famine, he also obeyed. But here, Isaac also could have easily went into Egypt as his father's days, but he decides to obey God, and he stays in Gerar. But there's a point that I want to make here, and that is when Isaac was confronted by King Abimelech, and the thing that I want us to pay attention to here is the fact that King Abimelech recognized the God Isaac served. Because when he approached Isaac, he said, "What have you done to us?" Because later on we know that Isaac lies and tells them that Rebekah is his sister, right? And so what I'm trying to get us to see is that when we are faithful to God, when we obey or when we proceed to listen to the promise that God makes to us, that he in turn has favor for us. Because in this instance, we see a mistake by Isaac. Isaac lies. But guess what? God's favor was over him, in that King Abimelech recognizes that. And he says, if anybody touches Rebekah, that person would put to death. And so for us, what does it mean for us? That means when we obey God, when we follow God, when things happen to us, God is going to look after us. And that is the point that I want us to pay attention to. And so here we see an example of a promise to God, and actually to Isaac. And in this instance, in this particular chapter, there's God reestablishes the promise to Isaac in this particular instance in two ways. And so moving further along, I want us to switch our attention back to Hebrews chapter 11, where it says, by faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. So, and this account is in Genesis 27, verse 26 through 40. So at this time, there's one thing when I was preparing for this lesson, was the fact that Isaac had, we can talk about Isaac and the examples of faith that he lived by. But the Hebrew writer makes mention of this particular account. And he mentions that by faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Of all of the stories that he could have picked, he talks about faith by Isaac in a sense that he invoked blessings on Jacob and Esau. Now we know that when Isaac invokes this blessing, he was at his deathbed. He was basically at the later part of his years, and we know that he was about to die. And he tells his son, his favorite son Esau, and he tells Esau, he says, "Go out into the fields and kill game and make my favorite stew." And while he's having this conversation, guess who hears about it? Rebekah. And Rebekah, as we know, her favorite son is Jacob. And she tells Jacob, "Jacob, I need you to go out and find me 2 goats. I will make stew for your dad. And you in return will receive the gift, the blessings from Isaac." But I want us to also pay attention to this account, because we learn in chapter 25 in the book of Genesis that Esau, after he had went out into the fields, sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob wisely noticed that moment and took advantage of that. And he basically got the birthright from Esau. And so in that moment, when Isaac blesses Esau and Jacob, we might think that he wrongfully blesses Jacob in this particular account, but really, he rightfully, by blessing Jacob, fulfilled the command of God. Because all along, when I read that chapter, something jumped out at me about the character of Esau when he sells his birthright to Jacob. What that tells me is, at the time, Esau probably despised his birthright. To him, probably didn't mean much to him. And so Jacob wisely takes advantage of that moment. And in this moment, when we think that, in our eyes, we might think that he was deceiving his father, in actual reality, he was actually received the blessing that God had intended for him to receive. Because one thing I also want us to keep in mind is, when God chooses us, it doesn't matter our birthright. Because in that time, it was customary for the father to bless the firstborn son. And so I want to ask this question: why was this so important for Jacob and also for Rebekah to notice that and to have Jacob receive the blessing? Why was it so important? Even though it was not a race, in this particular moment, why was it so important for them to receive the blessing of Isaac? Does anybody have an idea why it was very important? The importance is, in Hebrews 11:20 says, by faith Isaac invoked future blessings. So the blessings that Isaac would invoke, the blessings that Isaac will bless Jacob and Isaac will in fact sort of serve as a prophetic outline that will shape the fortunes of the future of Jacob and Isaac. And the reason also, when I was studying for this particular class, I wrestled with this verse because I did not understand. And the more I read into it, the more I understood that. And the reason why the Hebrew writer picks this particular story is because we know that these Hebrew writers, these Jewish Christians whom this epistle is initially intended for were being persecuted, right? And so this story where we have an account of a patriarch who is dying at his deathbed and makes a blessing, and that blessing is a blessing of faith, because when we think about it, Isaac dies, and before he dies, in all actuality, the promises that God had promised to him, to Abraham and to him, he had not actually received. But he actually dies, having faith that the blessings that he would bestow on Jacob and Esau would in fact come to pass. And so other translations might say, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob concerning things that was to come. The things that was to come was in fact the promises of God that were yet not fulfilled. Does anybody have any comments or any questions? Yes.
We serve God when we're in perfect peace. And we might be straight lined on where we're going and what we should do. But we make mistakes along the way and we sin along the way.
That's right.
But all things work together for good. And God's in the background trying to get everything worked out for us. That's the way I see this. Promises came through because inevitably all of these people proved to be faithful.
That's right. And
that's what we must do as well.
thank you, Jack. And I want to also make this, for the sake of time, I meant to make this point at the end of my lesson. But when we think about the patriarchs that came after Abraham, meaning Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and even Joseph, there's a common thing that they all had. And before they die, right, God had made them a promise. But actually, before they all die, they had not received the full extent of that promise. And yet, guess what? They died believing in God. They died believing in the faith. They had faith in the promise that even if when they are dead, that God will still fulfill that promise. I think that is the point of this whole class today that I want us to take with us. Because I know that I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I know that Jesus Christ came on this earth and he died for my sins. I believe that he rose up and he went into heaven and he's interceding for us at the right-hand side of God. There may be a time that I may die, that I may not see Jesus Christ come back. But does that stop me from having my faith in God? Does that stop me from not believing in the promises of God? No, because I know that even if I die, that the promise that God has made to us will still be fulfilled. And that is the point that the Hebrew writer is trying to make here, is that he's saying, hey, look at these Jewish Christians whom are being persecuted. And here you are, you have an example of faith by these individuals who died believing in the promise of God. And that is the point that I want us to take with us today, is that when we leave here, that we are to live in a way that when we die, we have our faith in God. We die knowing that the promises of God will still be fulfilled. That is the point that I want us to keep in our mind. Does anybody have any questions? Any further comments? Okay, so with that being said, we'll move ahead to faith by Jacob. And so in verse 21, it says, by faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. Now, allow me to take a minute here and spend some time on the fact that, once again, the Hebrew writer of all the stories, now we know Jacob also showed tremendous amount of faith in God. And also, he was also a very conniving person. I mean, he deceives his father. He marries, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 wives? But in that, the Hebrew writer chooses to talk about his faith as when he was dying, he blesses the sons of Joseph. Let me make this account as when he was about to die and Joseph brings his son, he places his right hand over the firstborn, over the younger son of Joseph, who is Ephraim. And then he places his left hand over Manasseh, who is the firstborn. Now, we all know how important it is for the father to bless the firstborn, because as we read, The firstborn is to take rule over the siblings. How did Joseph react when he noticed his dad put his right hand over the younger one and the left over the the older son? Which means the younger in this particular instance gets the full blessings of God. The promises that God had handed to Abram would go to the younger. How does Joseph react in this particular moment? Does anybody remember that account? He switches, yes. He says, no, here's how it's supposed to be. Put your right hand over Manasseh, the firstborn, and then put your left hand over the younger. But Jacob says, no, I know. He too would be saved. He too would be a nation. And in that day, in fact, both sons are adopted into the household of Israel, which is a little confusing to me. And so that was one point that I wanted us to keep in the back of our mind. And so all along, we know that Jacob in Genesis chapter, I believe in Genesis chapter 29, verse 10. Can I have someone read Genesis 29, verse 10 through 22, please?
Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled a stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I should give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him as but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast.
Thank you, Keith. And before this story, and I want us to also take a look at Genesis 28, where God makes a promise to Jacob, right? And then so in verse, I'll start in verse 10 of Genesis chapter 20. It says, Jacob left Beersheba and went into Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and laid in the place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you will lie, I will give to you, to your offsprings. Your offspring shall be like the dust of earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in you, in your offspring, shall all the families of the earth be blessed." And I'd like to stop right there and say that here we also see a promise that is made to Jacob. And how does this promise come to be? It comes to be because we know that Jacob tricks his older brother. And when his older brother finds out that he had stolen his blessing, he was angry. And so his mom tells Jacob to go into the land of Haran and to meet with her brother Laban. And so on his way to the land of Haran, God appears to Jacob in a dream. And here we see an example of a promise that God makes to Jacob. And so I just wanted us to make account of that promise. And so with that, let's move further along into Hebrews 11, verse 22. And this patriarch, Joseph, I think we can spend the whole day talking about him because he lived a life of faith. I mean, Joseph, if we can have a whole 10-week class on Joseph alone, on the type of life that he lived, the faith, the example of faith that he was to us. And so in Hebrews 11:22, it says, by faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. So once again, of all of the stories of Joseph in this particular instance, he decides to go with Joseph while he was at his deathbed once again. Why is that? And I think it's because of the point that I made earlier was that these Christians, these Jewish Christians whom this epistle is written for, was supposed to serve as an example. And so the Hebrew writer uses this verse to say, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of an exodus. When I think of an exodus, I think of people who are in bondage or servitude that are trying to leave into a land where they'll be safe, where they'll gain their freedom. And so in this verse, why would the Hebrew writer make remark that Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the Exodus? Had anything happened in that time that would suggest to us that the sons of Israel were in danger at that moment? Had anything happened? No, nothing. And so for him to make that remark means that, in fact, when Joseph was dying, he believed that one day that his brothers, that the people of Israel, one day will be in bondage. And that is, how does he know that? Is because of the things that God had spoken. And so when he's dying, he's basically telling his brothers that one day, when I'm gone, when I'm dead, the promise of God will be fulfilled, and you shall be taken out of this land and into the home, and to go to home, which is Canaan. And I also want to make this remark. Joseph lived in this land for over 100, about 90 years, because he was there when he was 17. He knew for a fact that was not his home. And so when he mentions and he gives them directions to take his bones, he's saying that this is not my home. Even though I lived here all these years, this is not my home. Take me with you when God takes you out of this place. Take my bones with you when you leave from this place. And also, we also learn some of the examples of faith by Joseph, because he remained faithful even when he was sold into slavery by his brothers, right? And then when he was in Potiphar's house, when his wife tried to seduce him, what did he do? He remained faithful. And even in prison, when all odds were against him, he didn't say, oh, woe me. He also stayed faithful to God. And how does God bless him? He makes him the prime minister of Egypt. And so once again, we have this theme of promises of God, and also the promise by the God to these patriarchs who would die not having received the full extent of that promise, and they die in faith. That is the focus of the study today. That is what I want us to hone in on. And so with that being said, I want us to quickly read Genesis 50, verse 24 and 25. And it says, and Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you out of this land, to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And so once again here, he's making this account to his brothers and saying that he's about to die. And then God is going to lead him out of this land. And then he made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry your bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. So Joseph dies 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. So that is all I have today. Does anybody have any closing comments or questions? Then I'll give you guys 3 minutes back. Thank you.